Hello again, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about using more distribution, just this time there's going to be some double negation in there, which means that there's going to be multiple negative signs in our expressions. Don't worry too much about it, you guys will know what to do. As always, let's go ahead and think about our PEMDAS. And we know that we're going to be using distribution, so let's just go ahead and jump in. What I noticed right off the bat in this problem is we have multiple different variables this time. I have a W and I have a Z, and then we have a Z and a W inside the parentheses, and then another Z out here. Looking at just inside our parentheses, I know that the Z term and the W term cannot be combined because they are not like terms. Z and W are not like terms. So I know that I have nothing to do with parentheses just yet. There's also no exponents, none of that yet. Then let's talk about our multiplication. We remember that our distribution is the same thing as multiplication. So I'm just going to go ahead and multiply those in. I'm ignoring everything else on the outside of our parentheses so far. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and multiply this 4 or -4, depending upon how you want to think about it. I'm going to multiply that in. I am going to choose to multiply in a -4. We'll talk about what that does in just a minute. -4 times this first term of -5z plus, let's go ahead and distribute into our second term, this -4 times our 2w. And as usual, we're going to bring everything else down that we have not dealt with yet. Now here, the operation that I am going to use is actually an addition. That's different than what we've been doing before. The reason that I'm including an addition here is because I already included the minus sign right there. I already included a minus sign right there. And if we think about it, if this were to be a negative times a negative would be a positive. But really, this is supposed to be a -4. So whenever we're doing this, we need to be extra careful that we're keeping track of our signs appropriately. Okay, next up, let's go ahead and talk about our multiplication. We already did the distribution, but we do have some new multiplication that we need to do in here, okay? So let's talk about this. -4 times -5z is going to be a positive 20z. Going to bring down that same addition, and I'm going to multiply these two together. -4 times 2w is -8w, and then everything else is exactly the same from here on out. Now, remember, we had said that this was going to be an addition and it's staying an addition, and I just want to point out that we could have predicted that this was going to be a positive because we saw that there was a negative and a negative right there. It all makes sense. Okay, so back to where we were. Let's go ahead and maybe rearrange some of these terms because I see that of my 4 terms, I have 2 with w's and then I have 2 with z's. So I got some combining to do. Let's go ahead and rearrange things so it makes a little more sense to us. I'm going to scooch over this adding -8w. I'm going to now write down my z's. Okay. Now, remember, anytime we are adding a negative, it's the same thing as subtracting. So really, we're taking -6w minus 8w, which ends up being -14w. And then we're going to subtract 4z from 20z, which is still a positive 16z. In summary, we used distribution and simplified, even in these double negation areas, we simplified that down to -14w plus 16z. Great job, everybody. Let's go ahead. I'm going to erase this. You guys move down further on your piece of paper. We're going to do one more example together. Okay. We have -6 times -x minus 2y minus 5 times -7y minus 7x. Okay. This is a doozy. We got two different areas of distribution that we need to do, and we need to be very careful with our signs, okay? Let's go ahead, jump in, get started. With our PEMDAS, we know that we cannot combine anything inside of our parentheses because these are unlike terms. Each term has a y and an x, can't combine them. But let's go ahead and distribute this first one here. We're only paying attention to this first term right now. So first up, we have -6 times -x minus -6 times 2y. Okay, we distributed the first set. Now, we have that pesky negative sign / subtraction sign again. So we can do a couple things here. We can either option 1, go ahead and write this as an addition sign and then include the negative into both terms like we did in the last problem, or we can keep the negative, but then we need to just distribute in this +5. Let's go ahead and do it that second way. This is different than the last version that we did. And I am going to do something called adding in brackets. This is a bracket. A bracket is the same thing as a parentheses, but this time it's just a bigger parentheses, that's all, okay? I'm going to treat this distribution just the same. I'm just going to keep it inside of our brackets or our big parentheses. Let's go ahead, distribute in this 5. Remember, we're having it be positive this time, minus second distribution, 5 times -7x. Oops, I'm sorry about that, guys. 5 times 7x. Okay. So let's go back and think again about our PEMDAS. Now, we do have a set of parentheses, but this time they're brackets, same thing. We do have some operations to be doing inside of our big parentheses here, or this bracket, whatever we want to call it. So let's go ahead and do this multiplication in here first. I'm going to make that just a little smaller. 5 times -7y is -35y minus 5 times 7x, which is 35x. Okay. I'm going to include that minus sign down there, and I'm going to go ahead and do this multiplication as well, because I know that there's no other operations that can be done inside these parentheses. There's also no exponent, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump into the multiplication. -6 times -x is a positive 6x. Now, minus -6 times positive 2y is 12y. Or I'm sorry, -12y. Okay. Now, going back here, thinking about our second set of distribution that we already worked on. Now, I basically have brackets, or I can even rewrite these as parentheses now. I just like to use brackets because it makes more sense in my head, and it helps me see that this is like a big parentheses. I see that this is a big chunk of what's going on. Here, because there's fewer parentheses, there's fewer stuff going on, I can just use parentheses, no big deal. Same thing. What I want you guys to see here is that we have a negative sitting in front of this big expression in the parentheses. This negative is going to apply to each of these. We're essentially doing almost another distribution. We're distributing this negative in to both terms. Negative times a negative becomes a positive 35y. Negative times a negative becomes a positive 35x. Okay? We distributed in our negative to both terms inside of this parentheses. Let's go ahead and jump back over to outside. 6x minus a negative 12y, we know that that's going to become a positive 12y. Just bring down that 6x. We end up with all positives here. So now let's go ahead and rearrange so that we can more easily combine like terms. 6x plus 35x plus 12y plus 35y. We're going to go ahead and combine those like terms. 6x plus 35x is 41x, plus we're going to combine again those like terms. 12 plus 35 is 47y. This is our final answer. We turned that huge doozy of an original problem into a simple 41x plus 47y. Great job, everybody. Talk to you later.